I believe that my job as a landscape photographer is to better depict the landscape in front of me and present to the viewer the subject I have chosen. Sometimes the landscape looks boring, or maybe the light wasn't that beautiful. So for me at least, a black and white conversion means that I can better transmit the message of the photo and to better depict the subject. So this is what you're going to see in the video from today. You're going to see 3 of my photos, and I'm going to convert them to 3 black and white images. And I'm going to discuss how I'm approaching this and what is the reason for which I'm converting each of these 3 photos to black and white. Hey everyone, my name is Toma, Photo Tom here on YouTube. I'm a full-time landscape photographer from 2009, and this channel is all about landscape photography. So if you're interested in this topic, make sure to subscribe for more similar videos. Now, if you want to learn more about landscape photography and you want to learn from me, you have a couple of options. You can buy my ebook. You can watch one of my Skillshare courses. You can do that for free, I think, for 1 month if you're using my affiliate link. Or you can join me for one of my workshops. And right now there are spots available for the forest photography workshop in October. And now it's time to go back to the topic from today, and that is to convert 3 of my personal photos into 3 black and white images and share with you some thoughts and ideas and details that go behind the scenes. The first image that I'm going to edit, it's a landscape from Tuscany. And as you can see, it was a cloudy day. And I really liked how this winding road was traveling through the green grass and was leading the eye to the house up on the top of the hill over there. Now it helped me a lot to have those dramatic clouds, and I decided to frame it in a way that the road is leading your attention to the house, but I also benefit from the clouds above. Now, in the case of this photo, I will also do a little bit of cropping to better frame it. And I believe that cropping is a really powerful tool that you can use to improve your photos. I know that there are a lot of photographers that believe that your photos should be straight from the camera in terms of cropping, but I'm one of those photographers that if by cropping I can improve the image, maybe now I'm more relaxed. Maybe I'm looking at the photo in another way, and maybe I'm seeing a better framing. So why not cropping it? So let's begin by doing this crop, and I'm going to make sure that this lock is closed. This means that I'm going to preserve the aspect ratio of the photo. So I'm going to do it something like this, where I'm going to have the house in the upper right corner of the image, and then I'm going to have like 2/3 of the photo is going to be the foreground, and then 1/3 of the photo is going to be the clouds. Now let's do a simple black and white conversion of the photo. Okay, and as you can see, it doesn't look that interesting. Now what I want to emphasize is the road and the house, and for that I'm going to first create a linear gradient, and I'm going to drag it on the sky, and of course I'm going to take the exposure a little bit down and increase the contrast. And by increasing the contrast and bringing the exposure down, I'm creating a much more dramatic and much more powerful and interesting sky, if you want. Now, how can I better emphasize the road? Well, I can do that by darkening the rest of the field, and the road it's wider and it will become much more visible. So in order to do this, I'm going to go to this black and white mixer, and I'm gonna see if darkening the green can solve the problem. And I think it did. It does. I think it solves the problem now. I don't need to go too much with this darkening of the green because it's gonna look too dark. But right now, as you can see, the road it's perfectly visible. We are having a good composition. The only thing that it's missing is a thing that I think works best with black and white photos. So this is a technique, this is an interesting thing that you can do. But when you do this on color photos, sometimes it looks a little bit strange. You need to be extra careful with this technique. But with black and white images, I think it works. So let's go to local adjusting and create a radial gradient. And I'm dragging it across the house over here. So what I'm doing is introducing some light into the photo. And as I said, when you're doing this with color images and light, it's not actually there, sometimes it looks strange. So you need to be careful. But when you're doing this with black and white, I don't know why, but it looks good. I mean, when people look at black and white images, they are already accepting that, okay, this is not a duplicate of reality. This is an interpretation. It's black and white. It doesn't look like reality. So why not go overboard with your editing? So let's increase the exposure. And as you can see, I'm starting to lose a little bit of details in the clouds. And to compensate for that, I'm going to take the highlights and bring them down a little bit. And I'm also going to increase the contrast. Okay, now if I go in the overall settings in the basics, I will increase the contrast on the entire image and take the exposure a little bit down, just a tiny bit. And then go back in the local adjustments, select the radial, and increase the shadows just a tiny bit, and maybe the exposure a little bit. Okay, and this is the final image. Now let's take a look. So this was the original image. As you can see, it's a pleasant photo to look at, but it's not that interesting. You need your photos to pop if you want them to be noticed. It doesn't work in any other way. So this is the before and this is the after. And as you can see, you have a lot more drama happening with the black and white conversion. Now let's move to the second image, and let me show you how I'm approaching using or building on the techniques that I already showed you in this first image. So this next image is a pic from the Dolomites, and as you can see, there is a clear peak that it's in the distance and it's bigger than the others, and I have some rocks in the foreground, but there is not a good separation. The light was dull, the image is boring, there is not enough color in the photo. So what I want to do is, again, do a little bit of cropping to frame that peak a little bit better, add some drama to the clouds and to the foreground elements, and create some separation to have some depth in the image. So let's start with the cropping. Again, I'm having the lock closed to constrain the aspect ratio, and I'm focusing only on that peak. Okay, and let's click here to do a black and white conversion. Now, in order to create more drama in the sky and the lower part of the image, I could add a linear gradient to the top and to the bottom of the image. The problem is the peak is a little bit higher and it overlaps with the clouds. And if I'm doing that, I don't know if the result would be that good. So instead, I'm gonna take the exposure of the entire image and bring it down, and also increase the contrast. And now, yeah, I'm having a really dark image, but just wait and see what I'm doing. As I told you in the previous image, with the black and white images, I think you can go a little bit further in terms of editing, because people will accept it a lot easier than if this would have been a color image. So let's go in local adjustments and use a radial gradient. Now I'm going to construct a few radial gradients, and the first one is something like this. As you can see, the feather is all the way to the maximum, and this allows me a really fine control on the areas that are receiving light and how the light is fading away. So let's increase the exposure, and as you can see, the peak, that block of stone, is already receiving a lot more light, and already it's separating itself from the rest of the landscape. Now let's add another radial gradient, and I'm gonna go only for the upper part, and again increase the exposure. You don't have to go overboard with this. The minute you create too much light in an area, it's gonna look strange. I'm not gonna say it's gonna look fake, because we are already interpreting the landscape by doing a black and white conversion, so it's already fake. It's not a duplicate of the landscape that was in front of me. But now what I'm gonna do is increase the contrast a little bit more on the entire image and decrease the exposure a little bit more, because now I have a little bit of detail on that peak. And I'm going back into the local adjustments, and I'm creating one final radial gradient. And this one is going to look something like this, and it introduces light that is not there. And the original reason for which I converted this photo to black and white was because the light was dull and was even and diffused, and it wasn't interesting. So I'm adding drama and interest to this photo. So I'm increasing the exposure. As you can see, if I'm moving the radial up or down, I can change the way you feel the image, and it changes pretty significantly. Now I'm going to keep it somewhere around here, and I'm also going to preserve the highlights. So I'm going to take the highlights a little bit down. Okay, now let's do one final adjustment of the image and increase the contrast. And now let's take a look at the original image, which was something like this. Again, the peak is not separate. The subject, it's not separated from the rest of the landscape. You don't have that feeling of depth. The image is boring. But now, I think it looks a lot more interesting. Now you have a point of focus, a clear point of focus. And I think it's very important also to be 100% honest with your images. As I told you, I'm introducing light that it's not there, but I think it's going to be accepted. It's a moral debate over here if you can do this or you can't do this, but you have to look at it, I think, in my personal opinion, you have to look at it in terms of what photography is in 2022. And I think that in the current trends and the way we are seeing images, I think this is not something that is overboard. Okay, now let's move on to the final image where, again, I'm going to do some cropping, and I'm going to explain why I'm going to do some cropping on that image. And again, I'm going to introduce and I'm going to accentuate. In that image, I'm going to accentuate the already light in the photo. So here is the last photo. As you can see in the bottom of this image, there are lots of elements, lots of small stones, and they don't look that interesting. They don't make an interesting foreground element. And for that reason, even if I keep this image in color, I would have to get rid of that area over there. So let's do this by doing a crop. And the way I'm going to crop it is something like this. So I'm having that slope that goes up to the peak in the distance, and I'm going to have that in the upper third area of the photo. And right now there's a hint of the light that it's coming from the left. It was almost sunset, so I'm benefiting from all that light that comes from the left and hits the mountain. What I want to do is to better emphasize that and create a much more dramatic image. Now let's do this, and Let's do a black and white conversion, just a simple black and white conversion, and simply increase the contrast. And sometimes this can lead to interesting results. So as you can see, the image already is interesting, but I think we can go a little bit further. Now, the bottom side of the image is dark. The upper part with the clouds, it's not that dark. And in order to create a balance between these two areas in terms of luminosity, let's introduce a linear gradient, something like this, and bring the exposure down a little bit. As you can see, it affects the top of the clouds also. So let's see if increasing the shadows, it's fixing the problem. Not really. So the other solution is to move the gradient a little bit higher and just take the highlights a little bit down. And this way, those peaks are not that affected by the linear gradient. Now, the next step is going to be to create a radial gradient. And I'm going to do that for that peak in the upper right side. And I'm going to introduce a little bit of light over there. And I think this way, this is a really simple way that you can make an area pop and draw attention. And now for the final radial gradient, I'm going to increase that light that comes from the left side of the image. Okay, something like this. And also increase the contrast. And now I think we can go in the overall settings and take the exposure a little bit down and increase the contrast some more. And right now I'm looking at a very dramatic photo as opposed to this, where the image was kind of flat. It was lacking an interesting element. Of course, that in the case of this image, I could have made it look interesting even in color, because I have separation between these different areas. The light comes from the lower left side, and this can highlight the shape, the proportion, the texture. But I think that converting this image to black and white, it's in the best interest of the image. So that was it for today, and I hope that you really enjoyed and you really learned something from this video. And if you did so, please share this video with your friends. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe to this YouTube channel, because you will help me. Now, if you want to support me, you can buy my landscape photography ebook, and you can also learn more about landscape photography yourself, or you can join me for one of my workshops. Again, the details are in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on photographing, because it's the only way that you can get better. Bye-bye.